I actually look a little better when the lights are much lower, so I want to take that back down. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Eng, and I work for the City of Missoula, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this conference this morning, and I really appreciate the offer to spend a couple of minutes with you as you begin your day learning about lots of things. And I continue. I love this job for lots of reasons, not the least of which is that I never cease to be amazed at this community's ability through its citizens to turn struggle and pain into hope and charity and good stuff. And that's what's happening here with Eleanor's project. At the City of Missoula, we're pretty lucky in as much as we hear from lots of folks and recognize our need to serve all sorts of folks and their great variety of needs. I have just an inkling of experience because one of my citizens, also a registered voter, by the way, asked if I would spend a morning in a chair and experience her world a little bit for a minute. And we started our day at City Hall in a chair, and we rode a mountain line bus, and we spent some time in the Rattlesnake Valley, and we negotiated sidewalks and traffic and bad sidewalks and bad traffic and experience the obstacles, and it made me keenly aware, if only for a moment, that there's lots of work to be done. So toward that end, I can tell you that thanks to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, City of Missoula is spending close to $500,000 on sidewalk projects throughout Missoula, and the majority of those funds are going to rehab sidewalks so that we have accessibility, which is extremely important. So next time you think about the Recovery Act and what it means, think about that, because it's pretty cool. Lots of folks in this room spend their days trying to figure out ways to make lives better, and the person standing at the front of the room is one of them. Tamara and I spent a little time out in the front of the hall talking about her work and the Eleanor's project work around and about, and you saw some of those slides this morning. But again, this is a person who has taken her personal experience and made a commitment to her community, and it's a big community, that this will all get better for lots of folks. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you this morning Tamara Kittleson-Aldred.
I look around the room here and I see a bunch of familiar faces and a bunch of not familiar faces, but I'd like to welcome all of you to our first effort to bring education, high-quality training here to Montana. Eleanor's project was born in 2004, and we've been involved in educational efforts almost from the beginning, holding workshops on wheelchair seating and mobility and alternative communication in, Colleen's coaching me here, alternative communication in Jordan and in Peru. We've presented at a few conferences internationally. But this is our first opportunity to bring something to Montana. And this has actually been a dream of mine and my husband's since 2004. Almost since we began working with Eleanor's project, people have asked us, what are you doing for people at home? What are you doing for Montana kids? And without going into long explanations of what life is like for people with disabilities in developing countries and how it's a whole lot harder even than it is here, it did make me think a lot about what we could do here in Montana, where the needs are quite different from the needs in South America and the Middle East. And that's how the whole concept of this educational conference was conceived. So thank you so much for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an occupational therapist. I did my master's degree many moons ago in pediatrics and early intervention, and that is what I was doing when my third daughter, Eleanor, was born in 1989. And Eleanor changed everything for me, because in the span of a few hours, I was no longer a therapist working with children who had disabilities and their families. I was the mother in one of those families. And I have to be very honest, it wasn't an easy journey for me to make peace with having those two roles of being both a mother and a professional. It was an ongoing journey, and it took me quite a while. But it actually led me, in some ways, to changing slightly my area of focus in my practice and specializing in wheelchair mobility and other kinds of adaptive equipment, because that was suddenly real important to me, because my daughter needed all that gear. I know what it is to live in a house where you've got the wheelchair and the standing frame and the special walker and the bathroom equipment. And I came to see through my own personal experience how when that stuff works, your life can work, and when it doesn't, your life doesn't. And Eleanor also introduced me to the challenges of transportation. My first inkling was when she was a baby, and she just couldn't sit in the car seat that her older sister had used. And shopping around, and I eventually was able to find a car seat, and lo and behold, there was a car seat that she could hold her head up in. But it made me start thinking. And as she grew bigger and grew heavier, and my back hurt more, it got harder and harder for me to lift her into our van and to lift her wheelchair into our van. And Sadly, ironically, just a week before she died in 2001, we had received word that we'd been approved for some funding so that we were going to be able to have an adapted van, which we ended up not needing. But all of this it has given me a real personal concern, both through my own life and my practice with kids and youth in western Montana, where I see time and time again families struggling with issues of how to safely transport their kids. And well-meaning people who are driving vans and school buses and things who are thinking, how in the world do I tie this wheelchair down? Where do these hooks go? How is this supposed to work? Do you know? So I see these things all the time. I deal with them with my clients, and I am just so thrilled that we can have a nationally known authority here to provide really good education for us. There's an irony in the shrinking budgets of our time. As I look at what my life was like 20 years ago when my daughter was a baby, and I look at what families are going through now, we know so much more, and so many more things have been invented that can help our kids and help our adults with disabilities. But it seems that the funding has just gotten tighter and tighter, and it's harder and harder to get the things that we know are out there and that are available and would be helpful. And in the case of transportation, that's really necessary in order to protect people's safety and health. 34 years ago, now you can figure out the math of how old I am. 34 years ago when I began my practice as an occupational therapist, it coincided with the passing of the first IDEA legislation, the special education law. ADA was passed just a few years later. Deinstitutionalization was the whole thing. People were being moved out of Boulder and similar kinds of places, and there was a lot of energy and excitement and commitment. And I think a lot of us kind of thought, oh, that's just going to go on forever, you know, and things are going to get better, and IDEA will be fully funded, and a lot of that has not happened, as a lot of you know. And I often feel sad that it seems to be more difficult for parents of young kids with disabilities now than it was when my daughter was little. And so with that in mind, we are really happy to be able to contribute something, a small piece, to what I think is a solution by bringing training here to Montana. I know that to get this caliber of training, most of the people in this room would never be able to go out of state, to be able to take the time, pay the money, all of that, to be able to go and get this caliber of training. So I am really pleased that we can provide this for Montana. And now I'm going to have just a few housekeeping details. I want to give a CEU reminder to everybody in the room who's an occupational or physical therapist. It happened kind of late in the day, but we were approved for CEUs from the licensing boards. So when you get your certificate of completion, you will be able to send it in and you will get CEUs. I'm sure going to send mine in, so I hope all of you do too. And I don't know all the details of this, but we were approved through OPI too for some kind of continuing education units, and Jamie knows about that. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors. During the breaks, there will be a slideshow here showing the logos of all of our sponsors. We are so grateful for their support to help make this happen. I'd like to ask you to visit the exhibit tables in the atrium. There are, again, wonderful people out there whose support is helping make this happen, and they've got lots of interesting products and services that are very worthwhile and relevant to the population we're talking about. We also have parking lot exhibits. We will be having, a little bit later in the morning, beach transportation school buses arriving. There will be a mountain line bus. There's an adapted truck, an adapted van, and all day there is going to be a clinic where people with adapted vehicles can get their cars washed and cleaned out. So there's stuff happening outside too. And that area, if you are a wheelchair user, you can access it going out through the restaurant. You don't have to deal with the steps out here. I would like to say that we've got more people here in the room than will be here in the afternoon, and that's because we have a contingent of bus drivers, a number of whom are going to be here just for the morning. They have to get back to their jobs and drive kids. And so if people are leaving or people don't come back, they're not doing this in protest, I don't think. It's because they've got jobs and they have to get back to their jobs. I'd also like to just thank everybody who has come. I know some of you have come on your day off. I know a number of you have paid your own way and you're losing earnings in order to be here. I know that there are some who've driven a long way to get here. We have people from Kalispell and Big Fork and Whitehall and Butte and down the Bitterroot, and I really appreciate all of you being willing to come. And also just extend a thanks to the schools who paid for subs so that some of you could be here. Would like to ask everybody to put your cell phones on vibrate so we don't interrupt our speaker. And just draw your attention to all of these little coloring things on the table. This was the brainchild of my wonderful right-hand woman, Jamie. And if you want to color in those pictures, Jamie, this is a long-term kind of project. You can see some of the ones that other people have colored that are strung up there in the back. And I think she has a goal of trying to get as many colored as wheelchairs that we have fitted for kids in custom wheelchair seating clinics in Peru and Jordan. And at this point, that number is 950, right? So that's a lot of pictures. And I think that's it. With that, I think I can introduce our speaker. No? Okay, I would like to introduce Sue Johnson from Columbia Medical. I met Sue on an airport shuttle, I think it was, in Washington, D.C. in April of 2008 when I was at the Continuing Education and Legislative Advocacy Conference, and we were on the bus together, and I found out where she worked, and she worked for a different employer then, but I knew she was the person who knew a lot about transportation. And we talked then a little bit. I told her a little bit about my dream of wanting to bring this information to Montana. And then time went on, and then we saw each other again last October in Boise, Idaho, and talked about it some more. And I am just so happy that this has come to pass, that she could actually come and share with us lots of good information. I had a chance to hear she's going to be sharing more today than what I had a chance to hear last October, and it's very valuable, and we're fortunate to have her here. She is on the committee for WC19 compliance, and you guys will all learn what that is, and also is involved with the new W20 compliance standards. So she really has the latest information, and I'm very glad that she's here. She's from California, and it's been over 100 where she lives. She came in last night, and we kind of had the weather check because we had our first little bit of snow in the mountains. So I want to present to you Sue and welcome her here.
Thank you, Tamara. I'm glad you remember where I met you because I've traveled so much that sometimes I'm not even sure what state I'm in. But I have to tell you, this is my second trip to Montana. I think I was here when I was about 8 years old. I have long-lost cousins that live here in Roundup, and I think they have a ranch and that sort of thing, but we really haven't stayed in touch. But I'm looking forward to touring the area with Tamara this weekend, and I'm enjoying your weather. It's really nice. It's not as cold as I expected, but I'm sure that will come. Let me tell you a little bit about how I got involved in transportation safety. I worked for Conveyed, that is a manufacturer of pediatric strollers, stroller-style wheelchairs. Does anybody know about those? There's a picture there of one in a van or in a bus. Anyway, I worked for them. I was the director of education, sales and marketing, and so forth. In that role, I was receiving phone calls from angry parents, from bus drivers, from vendors, suppliers of equipment, saying, the bus drivers are not going to put these strollers on the school bus because we don't put strollers on school buses. Well, that was kind of discouraging to me because Conveyed was a leader in developing the standard for crash testing of wheelchairs and had crash tested their wheelchairs or their strollers, and it seemed that those wheelchairs should be on the school bus, and there were a lot of other ones that really had unknown crashworthiness. And so I kind of wanted to find out who was making that decision about how wheelchairs were transported. So I started talking to school districts, to bus drivers, and then I started going to the transportation conferences, and I just got more and more involved, and it really became a passion for me. Also, my employer They were members of the WC19 Standards Committee, and I'll talk a lot more about WC19. Does anybody know about WC19? Has anybody heard of it? Has anybody seen or heard of a transit wheelchair that has the transit securement points on it, the brackets for putting tie downs? So that's something new. Oh, so you're aware of that. So anyway, I was on the Standards Committee for that. I was on that for many years. Recently, I am now working for Columbia Medical, and Columbia Medical is makes car seats, adaptive car seats. And so now I'm becoming involved in that too, in the crash testing of that, working with the engineers and so forth. But anyway, back to the we'll talk about car seats later on today, but back to the wheelchairs. So here's an example. I just thought this was kind of a cute cartoon. Hopefully none of us are transporting wheelchairs this way. Somebody said that reminded them of their mother-in-law. And I was kind of offended because I'm a mother-in-law myself, and I'm certainly hoping if I'm ever in a wheelchair that my family won't transport me that way. But anyway, we've come a long way in developing safe wheelchair transportation. I'll share what's happened, and perhaps I'm going to give you an opportunity to feedback to me some of the problems that you're seeing. If you have questions, raise your hand. I'll try and answer them along the way, unless we start getting way off, in the weeds and need to get back to task. Let me talk about the goals of the session. First of all, to consider the passenger's position in his or her seating system and mobility base with regards to safe transportation. I'm going to present the experts' recommendations and strategies. And these experts, I'll tell you who they are, but they're not me. I'm sharing their information. There's a lot of research, a lot of government grant money and so forth that has been devoted to this topic and developing good information. I want us to be able to understand the WC19 standard for wheelchairs that are used as seats in motor vehicles, and also discuss some of the problems and solutions for transporting children safely. So first of all, there's really a difference between seating for function versus seating for transportation safety. Seating for function is really designed to provide the person sitting in the wheelchair with independence. It needs to allow movement, it needs to be dynamic for school or work, and it needs to provide support versus necessarily movement. It needs to provide support for those who really need additional positioning options and so forth. And assistive technology such as augmentative communication devices or trays may enhance function, and medical equipment like oxygen tanks, ventilators, and batteries often are necessary. But when you're talking about seating for transportation safety, sometimes you need to trade off transportation safety with medical needs. Sometimes decisions have to be made that might not be optimal. And we'll talk a little bit about that in some of my examples. But you want to be secure and static. You want to be sitting well in your seating and have support. And then you want to be using W-tours, or wheelchair tie-downs and occupant restraints. And that's usually provided by the vehicle. The wheelchair tie-downs, a lap and shoulder belt, much like what we have in our own personal vehicles. So that's what W-tours is. Also, auxiliary assistive devices on the wheelchair may become an injury hazard in the case of a crash. I'm going to go through some definitions just so we start off, and then I'll show you some more interesting things, but we need to learn the basic fundamentals. So transit safety technology, that's equipment that complies with voluntary safety standards. W-tours, I talked about wheelchair tie-downs and occupant restraint systems. Now, a lot of times in the medical world, restraint is a bad word. People don't want their mother to be restrained. They don't want their kids to, well, maybe we do want our kids to be restrained sometimes, but restraint in the medical world usually is not terminology that's used in a positive way. And so, but in transportation, we want to restrain the occupant in a vehicle. So a lot of times when I talk about restraint, just keep in mind that's transportation terminology and not necessarily medical terminology. Tie down and securement system, that limits the wheelchair movement, and you'll see there a wheelchair that's being secured, has tie downs and an occupant restraint system, a lap and shoulder belt. And then WC19 is a voluntary standard for wheelchair transportation safety for wheelchairs used in motor vehicles. And then there's a standard for the tie downs and the belts. It's SAEJ 2249, also a standard used in transportation. So who are the experts? The experts that I got all this information from, that are doing all of the research, are the RERCWTS. They're from the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. And I just was there last week, and we were crash testing some car seats there. They crash test a lot of car seats. There's a few different facilities in the United States where they're crash tested, but a lot of the wheelchairs are crash tested in this Michigan lab. University of Pittsburgh and University of Louisville. And this RERC on wheelchair transportation safety is working right now under a 5-year grant through 2011. And their goal is, they're dedicated to making measurable improvements in transportation safety, usability, and independence for people who remain seated in their vehicles. So what does WC19 require? Well, WC19 requires, this is all about the wheelchair itself. WC19 requires that the wheelchair be designed for transportation. One of its functions is safe transportation. And it's not just about adding these securement brackets. These brackets, it matters the size, the shape, how they're attached and where they're attached. And I remember when I was at Convade, I often got calls of people asking if I would send them some of our brackets, our securement brackets, because they had a wheelchair that wasn't WC19 and they thought they could just bolt them on. Well, that's not going to work. It's about the design of the chair and the design and strength and testing of the brackets. Crash testing, 30 miles per hour, 20 Gs. That is the crash testing standard for our own vehicles, for car seats, and also for wheelchairs. So hopefully nobody's driving over 30, right? Is anybody driving over 30? Now I'm hoping the school bus drivers won't raise their hand. But actually, a lot of people aren't aware that the 30 mile per hour test, it's really not about driving 30 miles per hour as much as the change in velocity, they call it the delta V, of the vehicle in the crash. So it's really how fast you stop. So a change in velocity of 30 miles per hour, it creates 20 Gs of force. And I can tell you that that's a very severe crash test. So they say that 97% of all crashes are that severity or less. And so it's almost a worst case standard. That's what's used for our own vehicles and for wheelchairs and car seats. There are some other safety tests. There needs to be 4 easily accessible securement points on the wheelchairs. Now, how many people here have secured wheelchairs? Almost everybody here. Oh, wonderful. How many people would say that most wheelchairs have 4 easily accessible securement points on them? I see a couple back there. There are some wheelchairs. If it's a WC19 wheelchair, it has to have 4 easily accessible securement points. And you can see on this is a Permobile. Where's Scott? Is Scott in the room? He's outside, okay. He has a display here, Scott, from Permobile. But anyway, his wheelchair has 4 easily accessible securement points. The idea being that if they're easily accessible, they're going to be used properly. So that's why the standard requires that. There needs to be connectors for a crash-tested wheelchair-anchored lap belt. The wheelchair is supposed to be labeled that it's WC19 compliant, and that all of the belts on the chair are supposed to be labeled saying that they comply, either whether they're a crash tested belt or whether they're not. So all of the positioning belts on a WC19 wheelchair are supposed to be labeled. And then also the wheelchair manufacturer is supposed to disclose their test results. I'm going to skip that. So this is a video that I got from Convade. I'm going to show you this again. I think it was kind of startling. I was there. At Convade, we would go to the University of Michigan lab to crash test our wheelchairs. But before we did that, because it was an expensive proposition, we wanted to make sure when we went to the lab that it passed. So we had this crash test set up in the back behind our building in Torrance, California, and we would crash test. Well, we were testing this one day, and apparently the story is that the lap and shoulder belt that were on that wheelchair had been used for a previous crash test. So that's what the failure was. The lap and shoulder belt was no longer strong. It had been in a previous crash test. And I don't know if they're trying to save money on the belts or whether they forgot to throw it away. And I know all of you have probably heard if a car seat's in a crash that the belts need to be cut so they're not, reused. So anyway, that's what this is. But I thought this was really good picture of the forces in a 30-mile-per-hour crash. So if you are not using a lap and shoulder belt that's crash tested or a vehicle belt and you're relying on the seat belt on a wheelchair, this is the sort of thing that you would see this catapulting effect. So any questions on this? Crash? Okay. This is actually very similar to this chair, but at a time when transportation safety is improving for people seated in motor vehicles, now we have, I think I counted 13 airbags in my car. I have a Taurus, and they've got knee bags and side bags, and they're all over the place. We're really concentrating in making our transportation safer, but some of the new mobility devices really present transportation safety challenges. And this is an example. I really think that it's nearly impossible to provide an occupant restraint that's safe in this situation. Although we've done it with this one, but in this case it was not used properly. And actually I think he's not in here, so I can ask, but this I think was an earlier version of this chair. So this is a real-life public transportation situation. I'm not sure about my video here. Let's see. Oh, it's up here? So she backs up into this bus. This is Ginny Paleg, a therapist in Maryland, who videoed this, and she shared it with me. We'll see it again. So if you notice, the bus driver's not in his seat right now. He's gone back and just flipped up the seat and then went and sat down. There you go. So she's kind of on her own. No tie downs. And she looks at this lap belt and only sees one side to it and really doesn't know what to do. And the beeping is that the bus is going on. Okay. So what we want to think about is that really almost all wheelchair models sometime in their life will be used as a seat in a motor vehicle, whether it be in a personal van. A lot of the kids that are on the school buses When they go home, their wheelchairs are tied down in their personal vans. A lot of people are in paratransit, transportation, public transportation, and most of all, there are a lot of kids on the school buses that are riding in their wheelchairs. So transportation really needs to be part of the decision-making process when selecting wheelchairs. Many serious and fatal injuries to wheelchair riders really don't even occur in collisions, because I know that the yellow school bus is, I think it's the safest transportation the statistics are showing. It's a very safe ride, and they don't have very many accidents. But on the other hand, emergency driving maneuvers, if the wheelchair isn't secured properly, if the occupant isn't restrained properly, that is often what creates the injuries. But crashes do happen. And especially with the smaller vehicles, the collisions are always more serious. So not only do they have a higher incidence of crashes, but when they crash, they're usually much more severe. On a school bus, the wheelchair rider doesn't have the benefit of compartmentalization. So those kids that are sitting in the school bus on the seats that don't have seat belts, this is not the children with special needs. These are the, just sitting on the seat. Do they have seat belts in the school buses here now? Just the smaller buses, okay. Well, the theory on this, and I think I've got a pointer, is that this is a crash test dummy, and this is in the sled lab. The dummies, what they actually do is they slide off the seat, and their face and the whole front of their body goes against the back of the seat in a crash. Now the back of the seat is flexible, okay? So the back of the seat flexes, and so they're spreading the forces of the crash throughout a large part of their body, and they're protected. So compartmentalization does work very well. It works if the child is not too small, because if they're too small, they're not going to reach that seat back. They're going to be down on the floor. If they're too big, they may go over the top of the seat. But it works for a range of sizes of kids. And I know that there's been, in the last several years, a lot of controversy about whether students should be riding on the bus in seat belts. I think the concern, not only the cost, but the bigger concern is evacuation. How are you going to get the kids out? I know in California they're making seatbelts on the school buses a mandatory for all the buses. I think it was after 2007. I'm not sure what year it was, but they're starting to get new buses. But most of their buses are pretty old and they don't have the seatbelts yet. So anyway, because of the concern for safety of wheelchair riders, Dr. Larry Snyder from the University of Michigan, he started this research project and developed this voluntary standard, WC19. And part of this grant that he has is to investigate accidents, in-depth investigations on severe crashes of people seated in wheelchairs. He investigated 34 cases, and this was about 2 years ago. I'm sure he has more cases, but he gave me this presentation about 2 years ago. Out of 34 crash cases that he investigated, 3 were non-crash incidences, and 31 was a crash. And there were 36 wheelchair-seated occupants. And as you see, most of the crashes were frontal collisions, 23 of the 33 crashes. There was a variety of different, there were some rear end crashes. I think in a school bus, rear end crashes don't happen that often because you can see that big yellow school bus in front of you. So, what? You get, yeah, really? Do you have a lot of rear ends? Oh, wow. Okay. But anyway, in this case, there were a couple of rollovers and so forth. Most of them that he investigated were vans and minivans. And Most of the passengers were non-drivers, or most of the vehicle occupants were non-drivers. 11 were drivers. And most were using 4-point tie-down straps, but the ones that were driving were not. They were using docking systems, docking stations. So. But as a result of his investigation, what he found was that most often the tie-downs were properly used and effective. So, you know, the transportation providers are doing a pretty good job of tying down the wheelchairs. But most seat belts were not properly used or positioned. Some of them were not used at all. Some were improperly used. Some were relying on, it says postural only, the 5 right here. These 5, they thought that the wheelchair, you know, seat belt was going to do enough. Some used lap shoulder. Some just had airbags. So what he decided was that really the most important thing that we need to concentrate now that we sort of have wheelchair tie-downs in control, now is the lap and shoulder belt being properly used. So that's something that we need to focus on more. And it's really the seatbelt problem. Wheelchairs are generally being effectively secured. We're losing the battle on the belt restraints. So as you can see, can you guys see that? That the belt is just kind of twisted, it's loose, it's over wheels. This one actually even has a safety pin right there to hold it together. You know, over armrests, just, you know, misuse in a lot of cases. And then sometimes it's the wheelchair that's really the problem. It's a wheelchair problem. It's really difficult to fit a seatbelt where it needs to be close to the body because of the hardware of the wheelchair. Have any of you guys seen that or had the problems fitting that? But it's also a training and education problem, and so that's why all of us are here. So do this. You want to make sure that the lap belt is you know, between the wheels and the wheelchair frame, close to the body, positioned down low, and not over armrests. I think that's one of the most common things. One of the things that I have done in the last several years is visited school districts, the bus companies, and we just go and walk on a bus and go through the process of looking at the kids that are there tied down, and so often I see this sort of problem with that lap belt going over the armrest. So it's really something that needs to be addressed. Also, has anybody ever any of the bus drivers gone to a special needs rodeo or a bus driver contest? Yes. And where did you do that?
I went to various places in Montana, like Billings, Great Falls.
Okay. And it was a driving test, or what did they do?
It was a special place, drove around.
Oh, okay, so you had an obstacle course and so forth. And a lot of the states have these special, they call them rodeos, and in addition to driving, they also have tests of how to load a wheelchair and how to tie down the wheelchair, and also car seats. So, you know, that's something, if you have something like that in your state, it's really worthwhile to go to, and everybody learns a lot from those rodeos. Another important thing too is this seatbelt buckle. You don't want to have the seatbelt buckle close to, you know, part of the wheelchair that button might get pressed. So that's some of the concern, some of the fatalities that he's seen is that the seatbelt buckle released. So you want to have it against the occupant, not near or outside the wheelchair components. Another thing that I learned at Convade was that seating and mobility equipment decisions really can affect transportation safety. And this was a wheelchair that they had crash tested, a stroller style wheelchair. They had crash tested And it passed, and they had a lot of requests from families and therapists that they add a seat and back cushion. So all they did was add a seat and back cushion, and actually it changed the center of gravity so much that he was seated far out on the seat, and of course we have to test with the largest size dummy, so he just pulled the occupant restraint right out. So, you know, we want to think about when we add components to wheelchairs, they need to be firmly attached. Seating and hardware can fail. And these are actually the videos from the Transportation Institute of various tests. Let's see what happened here. The seating just came right off. Actually, what happened on that, the seats are attached to the frame with drop hooks, and in the crash forces, you know, if they're not strong enough, they flatten out, and then the seating falls right off. And especially, this is an instance where they were just relying on the postural belts, the positioning belts of the wheelchair. Pretty catastrophic. So the wheelchair is often the weak link in the occupant protection system. And that's why the WC19 standard is important, because we know that they're structurally strong. And it can be a little stroller that's crash worthy. Doesn't have to be a big heavy wheelchair in order to withstand the forces. It's a matter of design. So I'm going to go through some of the recommendations from the transportation experts at UMTRI. First of all, it's generally safest for an individual to transfer to the vehicle seat, out of their wheelchair into the vehicle seat, whether they be in a 3-point lap shoulder belt system or in a car seat. The vehicle seat is really the safest place to sit. However, for those that do transfer out of their wheelchair, out of their wheelchair, their empty wheelchair really needs to be secured in the vehicle. So let's talk about who should transfer out of their wheelchairs for transportation. Those who safely can transfer or be transferred and sit in a secure and upright posture in the vehicle seat. So let's think about this client. How many people think that she could sit in a vehicle seat and not in her wheelchair during transportation? A few? A few? Lots of people, okay. Her wheelchair is a wonderful, lightweight, tie sport wheelchair. It really provides her a lot of independence, but as you can see, she transferred herself to that seat. Why can't she transfer to a vehicle seat? This wheelchair was not designed for transportation. It does not have any upper back or head support at all for a crash. So that really is best tied down separately and her sitting on the vehicle seat. How about a scooter? This is an attempt at how you might tie a scooter down, but they have, as far as I know, does anybody know any different? There are no scooters that have been successfully tested to WC19. It really needs to be, the chair needs to be tied down, but the person needs to transfer to their vehicle seat. And here's a young lady who uses a walker for short distances. I'm not sure I agree with her hair color. Glad my teenagers are now adults and don't experiment so much with their hair, but she's real cute, I'm sorry. But anyway, she uses a wheelchair for long distance and a walker for short distance. Do you think she needs to be in a wheelchair during transportation? How many think, no, she can transfer? Great, you guys already know this stuff, huh? It's also best if you have a wheelchair that's been crash tested, it complies with WC19. So For those that are selecting a wheelchair, that really is something to think about. Order the transit option with the wheelchair. Don't do it later. Some of the manufacturers will not retrofit. A lot of times, you know, when I work for Convate, a lot of parents would say, well, you know, my preschooler or my kindergartner, I'm driving them to school every day. They won't ever ride the school bus. Well, when they get in full day school and that bus drives past their house for a little while, they'll be on the school bus probably. So, and it's safer for them to be on the school bus. So you want to look for the WC19 symbol on a wheelchair to see if it's compliant. It has a hook symbol, and we'll see some stickers on this. They vary a little bit, but that hook symbol should be at the securement point location. And that you want to also read the wheelchair user guide. If it's a WC19 wheelchair, they should provide you with instructions exactly how to tie it down. So I know that oftentimes nobody knows where the user guide is, but a lot of the manufacturers now have them on their websites available for download. So check the user guide. Some chairs will be labeled that they're crash tested, but they're only, not crash tested, that they're crash tested, but only for the wheelchair without an occupant in it. So some of them don't recommend the person be transported in the wheelchair. Just they want, you know, they provide the tie-down anchors to hold the chair in place. So look at the user guide. Most commonly are 4-point tie-downs, and that's what you always see in the school buses. You know, the downside of 4-point tie-downs is it requires someone else to secure the wheelchair, and sometimes that's not an easy process. But if you don't have a WC19 wheelchair, what you want to do is attach the straps to welded frame junctions, or a junction of the wheelchair that is fastened with hardened steel bolts. And you can recognize hardened steel bolts by 6 slashes. There you go. So you're looking for those strong structural parts on the wheelchair. You don't want to attach the tie-downs to anything that moves, that swings away, nothing removable or moving, armrests, footrests, wheels. You want to secure attach the tie-downs to the securement points there as close to the seat surface as possible. That provides greater stability for the wheelchair. And you want to, when you do the tie-downs in the rear, you want to have 30 to 45 degree angles from the tie-down. You know, that's really easy to say, but I know in a lot of vehicles that's difficult to achieve just because of the size of the space and the size of the wheelchair. So this is really just a goal to go 30 to 45 degrees. And in the rear, you want to have the tie-down straps located directly behind the rear securement brackets, like this. And you want to have them at least as far back as the shoulder belt. Okay. And in the front, you want to have the tie-downs wider than the wheelchair, and that provides lateral stability. So you've got the wider ones in the front, and on the back they're in the inside of the wheels, and in the front they're on the outside of the wheels. And you're looking for 30 to 60 degree angles for the front tie-downs. So here's an example of a PDG chair, I believe, that's tied down. Nice strap angles there. And then here's, sometimes the tie-down anchors are provided, but sometimes people use other things. You know, look for a bracket and I'll just hook it on. As you can see, this is not a welded frame junction. Those things could slide right along that bracket, and also you know, we don't know if that's a strong structural component either. Always position the person in the wheelchair facing forward. In California, a large proportion of their wheelchairs, they're transporting the kids, or school buses, they're transporting side-facing in California. And that has been, the law changed in '94 saying that the school buses have to have forward-facing wheelchair stations. I always thought California was kind of progressive sometimes, just because we have all the rock stars and the movie stars and, you know, but when it comes to wheelchair transportation safety, they're way behind. They've got old school buses. You know, you have to do the best you can with equipment you have, but anyway. So the reason why you want to be forward-facing is that the human spine is more flexible in that plane. So you're able to absorb the crash forces forward-facing better. This is a side-facing wheelchair crash. I'm kind of a crash test junkie. I collect them, good and bad. I thought this was kind of an interesting one from the top. Look what happens to the shoulder belt on that. And this really might be what you see in the case of a side impact, that sort of movement. So, you know, think about what's on the sides of the person as they're seated in the wheelchair so that they're not going to come in contact with something that's going to, you know, be hazardous.
What about passengers that are riding in the front?
Excuse me?
Passengers that are wheelchair secured in the front area of the vehicle?
As opposed to the back?
Yeah.
You know, I don't have an answer for that. I'm assuming that there's not really necessarily a difference. Does anybody know the answer to that? Her question was, is it okay to be riding in the front of the vehicle as opposed to the back? Any questions or any? I don't have any knowledge that there's a difference really.
In a bus?
In a bus?
No, in a vehicle, in a van.
Oh, in a van.
I was just thinking about that being the impact, side impact of a passenger in the front. If there weren't side airbags, that could be a big issue for that rider.
Well, that could be an issue if they were riding in the back too, because somebody could hit there on the side too, so it'd be an issue regardless of
It
where
seems
the
easier in the
vehicle.
back to put it in the middle is what I was thinking. Other
Yeah.
than the occupant restraint.
Good point. Thank you. Yes.
My understanding is that it's because of the airbag. So if it's a child riding in the front, you wouldn't want them in there just like a child without a wheelchair. Because of the
Right.
airbag. But if it's an adult, I don't.
It's like sitting in the vehicle seat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should be okay.
I also
Yes.
have a question. Why wouldn't the 5-point restraints like on the Britax car seats be the focus then for a restraint system? How about
On a
side
wheelchair.
impact?
Your question is, why don't they have 4-point harnesses on wheelchairs?
Right.
5-point harnesses on wheelchairs? That's a great question that I have an answer to. As part of my role on the Standards Committee, we were working on a change to the WC19 standard, which requires for all wheelchairs for kids under 50 pounds, they will be required to have a crash-tested 5-point harness on them. Because the 5-point harness really is a better fit for the smaller children. So they really addressed it for 50 pounds and less at this point. And I know because at Convade we did have one stroller we crash tested that way, and it makes a huge difference in the forces. It's so much better for the person, but it's hard to make a wheelchair that can pass a 5-point harness test. So, but anyway, for the little ones, that's a great solution that's on its way. It's still in draft formation, and I don't know when it's going to be passed, but at some point, the small kids at least are going to be protected with a 5-point harness in their wheelchair. So to provide effective restraint for the person in the wheelchair, they need a lap and shoulder belt. This lap and shoulder belt, it's the same thing we have in our own cars. Occupant restraint is critical for safety, and the lap belt fit and its position. What do you think about this? Does this look like a good lap belt position? How many people think it looks good? Nobody likes it. What's wrong with it? Can I have a volunteer? What's wrong with the lap belt? It's too high. Yes, this definitely is too high. And a lot of times this is the problem. You know, the positioning options on the wheelchair really make it hard to get a close lap belt fit. Another thing that you see in this picture, does anybody know what this is? Yes, it is a
Sub-ACES bar to control the pelvis.
It's a sub-ACES bar to control the pelvis. This piece is really not recommended for transportation. I think the biggest concern is evacuation. I've heard there have been instances and incidents where on a school bus or some other public transportation that was stuck in a crash and they couldn't get the child out. Not also to say that I'm not sure how many transportation providers really know how to take that off and get the child out too. Also some concerns about it injuring, because it's a bar, it's a metal bar. It's like almost like what, you know, when you go on a amusement park ride. So they're not recommended for transportation either. But this lap belt placement is really important, and you know, mostly because a properly worn belt is on the bony pelvic structure. You have it up higher, and just think about the internal injuries from that, of submarining or sliding down under that belt. And also this properly worn belt allows hip flexion, so it allows the person to move forward and it holds the pelvis back in the chair. So here's another video. It's kind of slow, but. And this is one where the lap belt, it's way high because it's over the armrest. They didn't feed it through under the armrest. But look at the submarining and just sort of think about that, the injuries resulting from that, pretty severe. The shoulder belt should be above and behind, and the belt should cross at the center of the chest. And I hear a lot of times there's a problem on buses with the height. Just like in our cars, now some of the good manufacturers of cars have put a little adjuster for our shoulder belt, but there are height adjustable shoulder belts available. The tie-down manufacturers that provide those shoulder belts also have height adjustable. For those kids that are shorter and you really need to get a better shoulder belt fit, order the height adjustable shoulder belt systems. This was a photo we captured of a lady. She just looked happy and comfortable. What do we see here? What safety is she?
Belt's too high, it's across the wheel.
The belt's too high, it's across the wheels, but I'm thinking about the shoulder belt. It's actually just on the very edge of her shoulder. It's supposed to be in the middle. Now, this I've come across in personal vans a lot of times. I've seen problems with the lap and shoulder belt fit. So it's really important for those that are providing vans and working with families that they make sure that the lap and shoulder belt is really going to provide the safety that it needs. Be careful of medically necessary shunts, and in this case, she has a shunt right there. This is just a matter of moving her to the other side of the bus. So just avoid those delicate areas. Trachs are a problem. I've had parents saying that they absolutely did not want their child using a shoulder belt at all because of their trach. But with proper positioning of the belt, getting a height adjustable belt, you really should be able to achieve shoulder belt. And it's just as important for them as anyone else that that lap and shoulder belt system be used. Also, he's he's too reclined. That's the other thing. And that was a medical situation where, you know, a trade-off had to be made because he couldn't sit more upright. So in that case, it was even more critical to get a good shoulder belt fit. Be careful of feeding tubes, ventilators, know which pieces of equipment are life-sustaining and which ones can be removed during transportation. Secondary positioning equipment. Yes? 10 minutes, great. Okay, thank you. A properly positioned headrest on the wheelchair may help protect the head and neck from rear impacts, the whiplash. So, you know, think about if you have a headrest with these sharp pointy things, think about who's near it and who might come into contact with it if there's other riders nearby. There's a lot of, you know, variety of headrests. But most of all, the thing we want to think about is that you don't want to have anything that attaches the head to the back of the seat. Because if you could imagine in a crash, if the head is held back and the body goes forward, the injury to the spine and neck would be pretty significant. So you never want to attach the head to the back of the seat. A soft cervical collar can really provide some good head and neck control, and this is one of the Hensinger collar, which sometimes is attached. Has anybody seen this collar, the Hensinger? And it really does provide some good head support, but for transportation, even the manufacturers said it's not appropriate. It's too heavy, and also it provides this lever arm so that it doesn't allow the forward head movement that's needed. So it could cause injury. And as you can see, if the neck is allowed to move forward, it spreads the forces across multiple vertebrae, as opposed to if there's a stiff collar, it's really hitting 1 or 2 points and, you know, more severe forces on the neck. Postural support belts attached to the wheelchair aren't strong enough to withstand forces of a crash, and you saw that crash video where the whole thing fell off, so you don't want to do that. They should be positioned not to interfere with good occupant restraint fit. And here's a video of belt fit interference. Let's see if this one will run. And this belt was actually over the frame, and the hip guides were interfering. So the person submarined. Tilt angle, it's best to ride with the wheelchair rider 30 degrees or less. Upright is best, but as you tilt back in the wheelchair, then you start to lose your good shoulder belt fit. That's really the issue with tilting, is the shoulder belt fit. So if you have to have, for medical reasons, more recline, then you may need to move that shoulder belt down and maybe rearward and get better shoulder belt contact. But it's a good question to ask, because I think at the end of a long school day, a lot of kids may be tilted back for rest when they really could be riding more upright. And that's, you know, something that, you know, the therapist, the school teacher, whatever, should address the proper tilt angle. Yes?
My question is, when you crash test the wheelchair, so are they crash tested in an upright position?
The question is, are wheelchairs always tested in an upright position? If it's a tilt-in-space wheelchair, they test in a tilt position. The standard has them doing it, I believe it's 15 degrees of tilt where they test it. And the main point of testing that is so that they can test that the tilt hardware is going to hold up in a crash. So they do test tilt-in-space wheelchairs in a tilted position. Thank you. But sometimes you have to compromise medical needs versus seating needs. If at all possible, remove and secure trays elsewhere in the vehicle. We don't want those trays flying around causing injury. If you can get a foam tray, for those kids that need that frontal body support during the ride, there are foam trays for a solution, or at least pad the tray. This is a tray ineffectively secured. So think about that flying around the vehicle. So if you can remove the tray, remove the tray. Storage is a problem. There's some pouches for the trays. I've heard different solutions for using tie downs and so forth for the trays down low on the floor. But this is a tray storage. It was really kind of a good idea. It fits on the back of the seat. But the tray was put in here. It's a clear tray, so it's kind of hard to see, but they left the hardware out. So you want, you know, if there's a child sitting behind that, it's not a good solution. But so there are some solutions to that. You want to secure medical equipment to prevent them from coming loose. You don't want them to be a safety hazard flying around, but also in a crash, in an emergency situation, you want to make sure all that equipment is going to be working. Some of it's life-sustaining equipment. So make sure that that's secured as well as possible. Here's an example. I call this hanging by a shoestring. Look at how that's secured. That really could be dangerous in a crash. Not to mention that the tie downs are not correct in the back. We've got something, part of the headrest poking towards the oxygen tank. I mean, this is a real life photo that a therapist friend of mine took. So keep your eyes out for that kind of stuff. There is an O2 bus buddy, which is a solution. It's a little compartment for oxygen tanks. I've seen brackets, but this is kind of nice because it really doesn't require bus modification. It fits in the L track of the bus. I think there's one bolt, one bracket that holds it to the wall. But other than that, you can actually use the oxygen during transportation or just store it. And then those chairs that have seating systems, just make sure that they're secure, the seat is secure on the frame, locked in. But also for those who are selecting and ordering seating systems, it's important to let the seating system manufacturers know that it's going to be used in transportation so that they will provide crash-tested hardware. I get a lot of questions, the obesity for kids and the entire population is a concern. So what about heavy wheelchairs and heavy users? If you have a wheelchair over 250 pounds, which I think most power chairs are over 250, you can use an additional set of rear tie downs. It's recommended. It's not going to hurt to have more is better on the tie downs as long as they're, you have a set that's in the right place, you can add an additional set. But also there are there are some bariatric chairs that are WC19 compliant, and some of them go as high as 600 pounds crash tested. So I think my time is about up, and I'll talk about our responsibility to our clients. So we want to think about the clients or these kids, the adults in our community, their safety throughout their entire day, including transportation. We need to work as a team with the transportation providers and the vehicle modifiers and make sure that we've thought about all of the equipment, all of the their wheelchair, their auxiliary equipment, all of those things, and how they can best be safely transported. And then educate whomever we come in contact with about safe transportation and motor vehicles. So I wanted to give my special thanks for this presentation to University of Michigan. They have a brochure, and Tamara can tell you where you can get it from their website. And I think there is a link on this. If you type in this http www.rercwts, this is on your handouts. There's a lot of information on that website. So you can get a Ride Safe brochure there, download it and print it.
It's actually a PDF that you can just download. It's 6 pages and you can print it out.
Has very good information, useful information about tying down wheelchairs. So that's it for this session. Thank you.
Okay, so now Sue will take a field trip to the parking lot, and there'll be buses and vans out there.
I will point out the thing that I most often see that goes wrong
is the shoulder belt, left shoulder belt, because in order to actually secure it right, you have to take this off. Okay? For mini wheelchairs you do. Because, I'm gonna bring a chair, but if you imagine me seated there, this needs to feed down through the wheelchair and it's attached here. If you try and put it on attached, you're going over the armrests. You see what I'm saying? That's one of the most frequent misuses that I've seen out in the field, is that they don't disconnect the shoulder belt down there.
Back up.
Swing forward.
Okay, oh, you want me right there?
Yeah, right in there.
You may want to take. Oh, you're doing great, Tyler.
Now back straight up a little bit. Make that stop right there.
Nice job, Tyler.
See what she says.
Yeah, over just a little.
That?
Okay, so there we go. Oh, good, we have some volunteers to do the tie down, right? There you go.
That? Am I over?
A little more, and then go back now straight. Are these attached? Okay, that looks. What do you think? A little more to the.
That's pretty good.
Okay, now to the front one.
Would you like to volunteer? Yeah, go ahead and do the front and you do the back.
This one actually maybe should be put over.
I don't have to go back to school now, do I?
Okay, so is this a promotional chair?
It is. The guy who
Scott? So where's Scott? Scott?
Oh, he's right there.
Scott, come on in. I have a question for you.
Could he go forward just a little more?
So the front, is that the front? Is your brackets way down low?
Or, yeah, on these, because these aren't,
This is not a WC-19 chair. So if someone were to use this for transportation, would you recommend it on that security?
yeah, those are actual tie-down points for the chair, just not WC-19.
Okay. So the reason for one of the reasons for WC-19 is that it has a requirement for where those brackets are, so that the height puts it in a position high enough that it will allow for that 45 degree. So that is, one of the improvements of having a WC-19 chair is that you have better tie down.
Now I think he needs to go forward.
I kind of agree.
Yeah, I think so too. Go ahead.
Forward a bit. More. There you go. But I feel pretty low though, the front is.
That's what I'm saying. It's not a WC-19 bracket, and so that's one of the reasons why WC-19 is a good standard, because it requires that the bracket be in a certain height range so that you will get the 45 degree.
So I have a question. If that middle track hadn't been there and his chair had a fit like it is, and you couldn't move that strap over, where would you hook? How would you hook that?
Well, you have to do the best you can with the equipment you have. I mean, most of the buses I've seen have either the 3, but more often I see double sets.
Okay. But it would have been okay then to have hooked it to the frame there, like the wheel, or to go over, or to go over and
And the other one's way on the outside though.
Yeah, we haven't secured that yet. Yeah, see the other one is more like. So there we are with WC-19. Now, so does your company recommend that a user ride in this wheelchair, or should they be transferred out?
They can drive in this chair. These chairs are actually made and they're crash tested. So as long as they're tied down, but they're using the vehicle safety strap, they are okay to travel in the
so
chair.
now we're going to do the shoulders and lap belt. So what I'm going to do is disconnect this. Yeah. Right. Okay. Excuse me, are you going to do it? Go ahead. Go ahead, that's great.
That's overly complicated right there.
And this is like a Chinese puzzle.
That's the one that beat down. You want to lift your arm up.
So Japanese puzzle, more cards, it's easier, right?
Here's the Chinese puzzle effect.
So this goes back.
This should come back here.
That comes there.
This one has to go.
So we want to go under the arm.
Yeah, it goes over on the other side.
You want to go under the armrest.
This should actually.
This really goes on this side and attached to this tie down. The other side. So let's do that side first, okay? Let's do that first. This side we can leave attached. So give me the feeding end, and we'll feed it down close to the body. So we're going to attach it to the tie down. Okay. Now we'll have to get a little bit of slack here. Are you twisted? You want to go across the shoulder. Now see, I would move this back a little bit.
If you're, it's twisted, right?
So that's not right, because it's twisted.
How bad can twist? Can it be untwisted?
It's untwisted.
Are you doing it with manual chair?
Sometimes these are
Manual chair, I mean, standing chair is a whole lot easier, isn't it? Yeah. Right.
So now you have to do this in 5 seconds or less.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so.
5 seconds.
Okay, so does that rest on their shoulder or behind their shoulder? The look that you have in your hand
Should be for the back. So is this, yeah, does everybody like it better back here?
Yeah.
It's going to be in line with the tie down. I think that's a good rule of thumb.
What's the rule of thumb?
Oh, yeah, it's not way back there, so that had to be. So that's where it should be.
In line with the tie down, is where you want the shoulder.
So it's actually like this one. Tighten that up then, or do you like that?
This is good.
Does it feel like a seatbelt?
Does it feel good?
Feels like it would have. Feels like my seatbelt.
Feels like in the car. Okay. So is that low enough for the lap belt?
Yeah, it actually feels like I put my seatbelt.
It is, it's low.
It's like, you know, yeah, it feels really good. It's comfortable.
Should the buckle be?
So that looks good. The buckle should be sort of at the hip, so we could actually change the length and so that it does end up there.
It's not going to be pushed by any reverse tape.
No, it actually feels pretty comfortable. To tell you the truth.
I have like a section of wheelchair right here. It's like a cover
A
right
hip
here.
guide thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, sometimes what you have to do is feed it between the back of the seat, like right through here. You can't even do that on this chair, but look at that chair and see if you can feed it down through the bite of the seat.
And then still have it down. It will come down to like about here then.
Yeah, but it's low.
That's okay.
I never even thought about the
All right.
shoulder building.
So these kind of
Yeah, it feels comfortable. Like
We didn't do our shake test and we didn't
a shake.
lock it. Yeah.
do we all do shaking?
No, but
You guys can.
so you
tip the
unlock the brakes on a manual wheelchair. You do this and just try and move it and see if it's not more than a couple inches.
So there's no headrest.
Now these Q-string tie downs, they have actually automatic locking. So if there's any movement, they get tight.
Like in a car.
Yeah. They're nice.
I don't know.
So can more than one wheelchair fit this bus or just one?
kind of slides things like just fine.
Philip sits.
It depends. Maybe not 2 power chairs, but
You might be able to change out the shoulder part. Right. You make it.
and every wheelchair is a
Straighten
challenge,
it out.
isn't it?
Just straighten out.
But you know, one thing that I think is so
No, no, no,
helpful
no, no.
if before the student starts
Okay, back up.
transportation, that you go through this process and don't do it when you got
Okay,
5
now
cars
just
behind
straighten
you,
your front end
honking their horns because they
Don't
want to
move the
go
back,
to
just the
work.
front end.
You know, plan ahead. What equipment is there going to be? An oxygen tank. Where are we going to attach that? You know, and how are they going to
You
fit
wanna
in
snug
relation
that
to the
window,
other
do whatever
students
it
in the
takes to
bus?
snug the window.
So I.
Some people, I think we're still missing a few people. They'll probably be coming in, but we're going to get started again and give Sue a chance to talk to us.
Okay, so I just learned so much by going outside, and every time I visit a different school bus, I learn more. And every time I get involved with a different wheelchair in a different bus, I learn more. So I just wanted to ask you guys, does anybody have something they wanted to share with the group that they learned new outside, or an issue that they saw out there when we were tying down the wheelchair that they've come across and nobody wants to volunteer? You did learn something. What did you learn?
Well, I learned that somebody else has the same question I have.
Okay.
And that is for kids who have wheelchairs that have elevated seats. Some of us are real interested in knowing whether it's okay for kids or people to ride in their chairs with their power chairs with their seats elevated. I know of at least one child who does that so she can see out the window. I know it would be a really typical thing that people would think that you could just use the seat elevator to raise the child so that the shoulder belt would fit better. And I'm wondering if you know anything about this.
Well, first of all, is Scott in here?
I've already asked Scott and he doesn't know.
He doesn't know either.
He's home and he doesn't know.
You know, just from my knowledge of transportation, my opinion on that would be whatever you need to do to get the shoulder belt fit proper, because that is so critical, the lap and shoulder belt fit. So if it has to be a higher seat, then that's what I would recommend, or I would suggest. Although anytime you do something like that, I would also recommend that you contact the wheelchair manufacturer and get some sort of a CYA. And just have some documentation why you made that decision, just in case of a lawsuit. So somebody doesn't say, look, you know, this is up here and it says in the user guide that you're not supposed to do this and you're doing it. At least so there's some documentation, and maybe the transportation supervisor approve it, so there's maybe even more than one person in that decision-making process. And also, anytime you venture away from, the optimum and make a decision, it's important to document it. Why you made the decision, and work in conjunction between the therapist, the wheelchair vendor, the wheelchair manufacturer, and the family, everybody kind of working together as a team. Okay? Yes?
When the driver is fastening the seatbelt down, the vehicle's running, right?
The question is the vehicle running during the fastening of the seatbelt?
The bus.
The bus is running while you're...
Get out of their seat and go and fasten it.
That's a bus driver question that I'd like somebody from the... Yes. You leave the motor running. And in fact, I think to operate the lift, you have to have it on.
Well, you don't have to, but it keeps the system charged.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you have more power with it.
I thought I've been in some situations where we couldn't do the lift until the motor was turned on, but it depends on the bus. Okay.
So what if you have other, like say other kids getting on the bus, and you're out of your seat? How does that work?
Make sure the emergency brake is set.
Yeah, well, we know that.
And wait till they're seated.
So you have to seat the other kids first before you...
Yes.
You know, I have to say that, her question is not really within the scope of my knowledge about, that sort of thing, and certainly important things to get answers to. And I think probably, who would say who is a good resource for the best practice related to wheelchair loading and securement?
Yeah.
Does anybody here in Montana know of a good resource for that information? Because I know it's different, the recommendation state by state. Yes?
Disabilities are saying the Department of Transportation,
The DOT, okay. And then, of course, there's always district policy and that sort of thing. And it does vary from state to state. I've been to many districts who have absolutely a rule that you never ride on the bus lift. And the whole state has that requirement. And others where they do ride the lift. I've been in some states where they will not. In fact, California is one where it's actually written in the regulation that they do not have to transport a wheelchair if the wheel locks are not working or there's not a seat belt on the wheelchair. So, like I say, the regulations vary from state to state, and you really have to check with your regulations. Anyway, so now what I want to do is kind of turn things around. I don't want to, this section is not really a lecture section so much as testing your knowledge, and then just go over a couple of case studies that I've worked with therapists on. So here's the first one. This happens to be in California. And I went to a medical therapy unit. It's like a center-based therapy situation where kids from several schools come to buses to have their therapy. And this was one of the buses. So whoever wants to answer, whoever has an idea, what's wrong with this picture?
Sideways.
Side facing, that's obvious. Okay. So look at her shoulder belt. She's not using any occupant restraint whatsoever, right? No occupant restraint at all. Okay. She's also right by the emergency door, emergency exit, and that's just the way the bus is constructed. Look at they even have tie downs there, so they would put a wheelchair in front of emergency exit. That would be a concern to me.
That would be a violation of federal law.
So, but it's an old bus, so it's okay.
No, it's not.
She's
Is there any laws on
tied down by the swing-away footrest.
She's tied down by the swing-away footrests. You know, really, in a side-facing position, you saw that video. There really isn't a proper tie-down methodology that I know of. So you do the best you can, but here she is. Here's another thing. What about this thing? What is that?
Stroller.
This thing in the seat in front of her. It's a walker. Does that give anybody a clue? Yes, you guys got it. She is a candidate, at least to consider whether she can sit on the vehicle seat. Now, because this is a school bus with only compartmentalization, that's a consideration. Because if she sits on the seat, she's not going to have any occupant restraint at all. So can she sit up? Can she, is she going to be safe in the vehicle seat? So we asked her therapist, and her therapist said, no, she can sit on the seat with the other kids. So.
Well, that strap going across that seat belt, that's another restraint system too can be hooked into.
The what?
That strap that goes over the seat back.
This thing right here?
That's part of another.
That's a shoulder belt or something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I used to have one on my bus, went over the top and he fit.
Okay, so, if she's going to sit in the seat, maybe, best is if she has an occupant restraint on the seat itself. So anyway, lots of good things in this one. I also would worry, she's going to go into the seat in an impact, and because of compartmentalization, that seat back is going to flex, and she's going to possibly knock that walker loose or come in contact with it. She was the only student on the school bus, so I just kind of had a question, why did you put the walker right next to her? Things to think about. Maybe on another seat. So there were a lot of questions when I saw this. Here's another one. This is a paratransit bus, and this bus comes and picks up this young lady at her group home. And so I took a look at this, and what do you see? Actually, the tie-down straps, they're loose. They're on a frame member that's not a welded frame junction. Occupant restraint, it's not on her. There isn't one. I'm going to go, I'll show you a little, well, you'll see a little closer. There is track there for it, but it's not being used. But look at this. This is a close-up. Look at that. What's that? And they actually even have the hook symbol on them. It's a WC19 bracket. But how many of you would have known what that was and would have used it? I don't know. You don't have to raise your hand, but the question is, you know, how many people know about WC19 and are able to recognize that this is really the proper securement point? But once again, you know, we saw this out in the school bus. You know, depending on the way the tie downs are configured, if you were to put it there, would you be able to get appropriate strap angles? So, I mean, there's a lot of issues with the space.
Look how close that wheelchair is to that lift. It's right in the middle of the aisle.
Right, it is close to the lift. And what's your concern about it being close to the lift?
Well, it's in and out, but it's right in the middle of the aisle. If you have to get people out of there really fast.
So you have concerns for evacuation because of the proximity of that to the door? Okay. What's wrong with this? That's not a good place to tie down. It's on the footrest, which we said no removable, swing away, whatever, no footrest, no wheels. What about the strap angle? Yeah, it's not. And what is the angles we're looking for? 45 degrees. It's actually in the front, it's 30 to 60, and it's 30 to 45 in the rear. That looks like a 90 to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so. This is that same vehicle, another person. He has a tray, look at that. Let's get that tray off if we can. Right up there's the track for the shoulder belt. So that's not being used. Well, he doesn't have an occupant restraint at all. Are you talking about his tie downs? Yeah, they are very loose. You know, and I believe it's hard to see in this picture. I think this is may also be a WC19 chair. And no head support at all. You know, in the event of a crash, his head's going to go back. He doesn't have anything behind the head. I mean, that's not a requirement, but it's certainly it's a good thing if you have a headrest or something behind to eliminate the rearward head excursion or movement. Let's see what else we missed. Yeah, that's what we got. Okay, this was back to the medical therapy unit. Another one of the students. I covered her face because I did not get a photo release. We weren't able to get a hold of her family to get permission to show her. So there's nothing wrong with her with the blindfold. We don't blindfold our case studies. Really, we don't. Does anybody want to kind of shout out what you see wrong here? The tray, okay. The tie downs in the front. Okay, this is, would somebody, maybe Tamara, would you explain what this head support is?
It looks to me like it's probably some kind of a suboccipital neck support that's also providing some lateral control.
Okay. It's a metal bar, though, covered with foam, right?
Yeah, it is.
So just imagine in a crash, in a side impact maybe, the injury that you might see from that. Just a concern. And so what would be...
a trade-off, you know, between what a person needs for postural support and what's going to be safe, and how you have to make those clinical judgments.
Absolutely. And so what would be one of the things you might be able to do to give her a little more head control?
A soft cervical collar might help.
How about if she was a tilt and space chair?
Well, it looks like it is a tilt and space chair.
So maybe put her in a more tilted position, okay? And, you know, we go back to the 30 degrees or less is best, and the issue for that is mostly the shoulder belt fit. Yes?
Now, is it our position as drivers that we're supposed to know how to tilt those chairs and put the support on their necks, or is that the providers?
The question is, whose responsibility is to provide the head support or put the neck collar on or reposition the tilt or whatever. Tamara, you may or may not agree, but I really think that it's something that the driver might bring to someone's attention, but also get the therapist involved, because it's really their knowledge and expertise to understand positioning.
Well, the best of all worlds is that the parents are able to know how to do that too. The parents will show the bus driver how it's supposed to be, but I know that doesn't always happen.
So, I've heard a lot of times at the end of the day, or even in the morning, the kids come and the child doesn't have all of their postural supports in the right position or so forth. So those things should be brought to the supervisor's attention, and then somehow between the therapist and the transportation department work together as a team with the family to try and resolve safety concerns. Okay. But no, you shouldn't be changing the tilt, because there's very likely medical issues that need to be considered that are not within your scope. Okay? Yes?
So, where's the safest place to store wheelchair trays or other equipment that doesn't fit into
In the compartment? Well, I had showed, a pouch for tray storage. Sometimes, at the back of the bus, you secure stuff with tie downs or whatever. Sometimes there's boxes that are, built in to put equipment in. So definitely all that stuff should be secured. Backpacks are really a problem. I mean, it doesn't even have to do with wheelchairs. How many kids have their backpacks that are on the seat? Where do we put the backpacks? They're all over the bus, very likely to fly around. So this isn't really necessarily a wheelchair issue, but it is a concern. I don't think I finished the problems with this. There's her shoulder belt right there. The other thing that is very clear is look how short that wheelchair station is. It's just so short. There is absolutely no way to get the right tie-down angles with that. And I wonder why. Does anybody have any idea what's wrong with this wheelchair station?
Well, there's no barrier in front.
Well, actually, I believe that this is a side-facing station, and that's why it's so short. It's in California. I think they're using a side-facing station for forward-facing, and I think they probably have to use a shoehorn to get her in. And you can't see it clearly, but the wheel is turned sideways here. So you can see that they really had to work to get her squeezed into that compartment. Now, these are real-life things that I observed and other therapists have observed. This is not made-up stuff. And I think, for the therapist to go out and look on the bus and for you to go and look and see, some of the equipment situations that you have in light of, some of the standards and the recommendations that we've talked about today, you will see there are some things to resolve. But all I can say is, you got to work with the equipment you have and do the best you can. Make it as safe as possible. Oh. It's pre-94.
Well, it's a short bus is what it is.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it is. It is a short bus. This is a personal van, and this is a family, a therapist, Jenny Paleg, actually from Maryland, and I went to a family's home, and the father asked if I would go out and look at the way he's tying down the wheelchair in the van. We were doing a wheelchair evaluation, but anyway, so I went out there and looked at this, and I had some concerns. Does anybody have any safety concerns with this? The what? The seat belt. Okay, what's it doing? It's high. It's over the armrest, isn't it? So we're going to have that submarining, right, in case of a crash. Although he's not going to submarine because he's got his subaces bar on. That's the guy with the subaces bar. So he's not going to go too far, but still, the lap belt needs to be positioned low on the pelvic bony structure, the hips. How about the tie down, the front tie down?
It looks like a bungee cord.
Where?
No, it's,
Tie down looks like a bungee cord.
Oh, no, it's just because it's at the angle. Actually, to me, the front tie down looks pretty good, doesn't it?
yeah.
Okay. So this is a lap belt issue. This is really not correct. It's still too high. We have some issues with getting close enough because of the hip guide and just, you know, we had to really squeeze that through the small space to get it on him. So it really is not even optimal there. I should have done a little better. Now here's the tie downs. And this is a Quickie Iris, wonderful wheelchair, well loved. But what we discovered was, and I've seen this in more than one instance, that the rear tie downs are not being secured properly. And this family was tying them down on this bar, and this is a tilt bar. It doesn't have anything to do with wheelchair securement. This is actually where I'm pointing to it, right there, where the securement bracket is. But it was so far up and under this wheelchair, and Mom had problems with her knees. She had had knee surgery and she couldn't bend down very well. So not only did she not know, but when I did tell her, she wasn't able to reach that position to do the tie down properly. So we did come up with a situation here. And this is called a quick strap. And both of Sherlock and Q-Straight both offer quick straps. They're very inexpensive. $25 maybe for a set, or they're very reasonable. And they are crash tested to 10,000 pounds. So then you can attach them to the securement bracket or to a frame junction. This is a good solution for maybe a power wheelchair that you can't fit the hook on it because the hook is too small for the framing. So this would be a good solution too. And then you attach the tie down strap there on the end of the loop. So this is a nice solution that we came up with. I called the wheelchair manufacturer to get approval for that, and he said, by all means, please do that. If she's not able to tie it down properly, these are a good solution. He also then told me that, that they are changing that wheelchair and moving the tie-down bracket location to another place, which they've done. So the newer Iris chairs have a better location that's more accessible. Okay, so he didn't do it because of me, but so, you know, all of these things that you have problems with the wheelchairs, I think it's really important that you do contact the wheelchair manufacturers if you can ever get a hold of the right person that knows about it, because, you know, they're not going to manufacture WC19 compliant products if they don't hear from you guys saying that it's important. It's extra expense for them, extra testing, and so they need to hear from you when you run into difficulties like this. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple more case stories. This is Doug. Doug lives in Tupelo. What state's Tupelo in? Mississippi. Tupelo, Mississippi. Like I say, I never know what state I'm in, but. And this is his wife, Valerie, and they have 3 kids with disabilities. Some are their own, and one is their own, and 2 are adopted, I believe. Doug drives. He drives in his van. He's also paralyzed. He drives with chin control in his van, but he never wears his seatbelt because of all this stuff, you know, all this equipment and so forth. He just cannot manage to buckle himself in. And so he doesn't wear a seatbelt, and it interferes with his equipment too. So he crashed. And there's the airbags deployed. He hit the windshield, but he had it was an Invacare store, It was locked down with an easy lock, and that's one of those docking systems. There's a bracket on the bottom of the chair that goes into the fitting on the floor of the van. And that really held. He had apparently a heavy-duty, double-duty pin or something, and so it did hold the chair. So what happened was his hand slid off the controls. He hit a bump or something went wrong. And he hit a tree. There's the easy lock system. He was on a ventilator for a while. It shattered his kneecap, but he was saved by the easy lock pin and the airbag. So he has a new van, and now the difficult issue about the seatbelt. I think what he does try to do in this situation is just if he can get help with the seatbelt, he does try and use it. But I haven't heard from him lately whether he's back to not wearing his seatbelt or not. But you know, for a driver, it's just as important as it is for all of us to wear the lap and shoulder belt. This is Veronica, and Veronica is in, I'm trying to remember, in Texas. All I can think of is how hot it was when I was there in the summer. She's 27. She had meningitis from an ear infection when she was 9 months old. She has dislocated hips, a G-tube. She's nonverbal. And this is her current wheelchair. As you can see, there's Texas road dust right there because they put that in the back of their truck when they transport her in their personal vehicle. And this was actually a seminar that our company did, and we had a lot of bus drivers there. And all of the bus drivers were looking at that chair, and we talked about where would you tie that down. And I got about 3 different answers. Because it's not a WC-19 chair, there, you know, you're just kind of guessing where you might tie it down. It's really a decision-making process, and they were all challenged. We came up with a new wheelchair for her, but I'm hoping this will run. We went out to the car and thanked the family. We went out to the car to say goodbye to them, and this is Veronica with her dad. Just hope this plays. Well, it's not going to play, but she had to lift him out and put him in the car with Mom. That's how she rides around. And you know, her therapist didn't even know that. She was surprised because she went out with the family. She wasn't aware that transportation was something they needed to talk about with the family. And you know, this is a caregiver who really, you know, Mom really wants to take care of her and cares about her safety, but in her mind, that was the safest place for her, in her lap. There you go. So then lifting her into the car seat. What a struggle. It's kind of in slow motion. It really wasn't that slow.
Here goes his back.
Just to see the challenge some of these families have. They did put her in a special needs car seat, and that's how she's traveling. And there's her extended family. Everybody that cares about Veronica and her wheelchair and so forth. So I think I already did this slide. I'll skip this. So whose job is it anyway?
Yeah, let me direct them around it.
It's all of ours, right? So I wanted to give some special thanks for this presentation to the therapists who have worked with me on the case studies. Jean Zimmerman, she's a wonderful school therapist in West Palm Beach County. She's often a speaker at the national and the state conferences. If you can get Jean Zimmerman to
your transportation conference, your state conference. She's wonderful. And she does, presentations on evacuation. And what her theory is that you never put a student on the school bus unless you can know how you're going to get them off. So she has a real good seminar she does on school bus evacuations with therapists and bus drivers together, working out plans and so forth. Jenny Paleg, and some of these case studies were hers. She's in Montgomery County School District. Delia Freeney is the therapist in California that I worked with the Sideways bus transportation. Sherlock, who provided this tie-down situation for me and shipped it to me to bring. So I wanted to thank them. In addition to that, I wanted to thank Tamara and Jamie. Is Jamie in here? And Rick, Tamara's husband. He saved the day on a few occasions. I had lost my computer bag that has my passport in it, so I was in a panic before the presentation, running around with my head chopped off. So he's helped on a lot of things, technical and so forth, so I want to thank him. I'm sure he's done a lot for you too, Tamara. And I also wanted to thank the hotel, the gentleman from the hotel that helped us with the technology. He really was helpful too, so that's that. And one last comment about this is how many times a day is a bus driver doing this position? Hard on the back, right? So bending, mechanics are really important to think about for the transportation providers, because by the time you do this, maybe 10, 20 times in a day, you're really putting a lot of strain on your back too. So that's it. Okay, so I think I have like 5 minutes for a few questions. If anybody has any more. I have a question back there. Great.
Questions from before when we were out looking at the buses. One of the power chairs, the foot plates were blocking where the chair could go in between the brackets, and so the driver was saying, "Oh, we can just take those foot plates off, and the guy can hold them just for the amount of time he's on the bus." And I kind of questioned the shift in balance if you were to remove foot plates. In that type of situation.
Okay, the question is, if you're having trouble tying down a wheelchair and the foot plates are causing interference with the tie-down brackets. And I saw a face there of someone who wants to answer that question. Are you a therapist?
I am.
Okay, so she wants to answer the question, right?
Well, I was just thinking what was concerning me mostly was that they were
holding the foot plates. A flying object. So like they're going to put them in their lap while they drive, or?
No, it was out on the Mountain Line bus.
Okay, so who's going to hold the foot plates? The person in the wheelchair.
Talking said, "Oh, you just hold them on his lap while."
I would be concerned. I would want to put them somewhere that's safe, but I don't know, from my point of view, not being a therapist myself, I would want to consult with a therapist about, can they sit properly without, are their feet going to are they going to have safety issues for their feet before you do that? There's questions to be asked. There's no easy solutions for anything, but it's important to ask the questions from the right people. Okay, yes?
I don't know if anyone's looked into this and nobody wants to write backwards, but some of it's just universally safer, it's right here,
Okay, the question is, what about riding rear facing? Okay, here's what I know about that, because the Standards Committee, the WC19 Standards Committee, has worked on a public transit standard that's different than for school buses and regular vehicles, because they realize that in a fixed route situation, they don't have the time to secure the wheelchair properly, so they're trying to come up with a securement station that doesn't mean tie-downs. And one of the considerations was rear-facing in that decision. There are some benefits to riding rear-facing, and it is done in some other countries. where the public transportation is rear facing. There are a couple of issues with that. Number one issue is that the wheelchair's structure is not built for the forces, to accommodate those forces in the rear facing. They're not tested that way, and we know that there are some concerns just because we've also done some rear impact testing, and we know that the structure is designed to be safe for transportation in a forward-facing position. And then there's other issues about ADA. The other concern about it, these are just some of the topics we discussed in design of this fixed route station. With ADA, we were concerned that someone with a disability might feel that why do I have to ride backwards? You know, just causing more of a difference than the other riders. So that was another consideration. And also just, you know, for those people that get motion sickness, not looking out to the front where you're going. So there might be some concern for motion sickness. So those were some of the concerns that were discussed, but it's certainly a consideration. Okay. Does anybody else have any more? How much time do we have? Where's our, I think we're about, is Jamie gone, our timekeeper? Does somebody know on our schedule, is it 12 where we're supposed to be done? If it's 12, I don't know how I could get much closer to 12 than that. Thank you very much.